Thomas Vale lived a life of solitude. Most people would call him a genius, a leading exobiologist who had spent decades studying alien life. He had discovered microbes on distant moons, analyzed signals from abandoned colonies, and cataloged strange plant life on Earth's own deserts that seemed to evolve in unusual ways. Yet despite all his achievements, Thomas felt an emptiness he could not shake. His small cabin in the desert was quiet, too quiet. The wind would whistle past the broken shutters, and the sand would crawl across the floor like tiny invaders. At night, he would sit by the window, looking at the stars and wondering if he would ever share his life with someone who truly understood him. It was during one of his routine surveys that the extraordinary happened. Thomas had been wandering through a narrow canyon, the kind that twisted like a serpent through the barren land. His scanner picked up a faint signal, odd, rhythmic, and unmistakably artificial. It was unlike anything he had ever detected before. Curiosity and instinct pulled him forward. The canyon opened into a small clearing where the sand had shifted unnaturally. Partially buried in the dunes was a metallic capsule, scratched and scorched, its surface engraved with symbols Thomas did not recognize. It looked ancient and futuristic at the same time, like a relic from a distant civilization. His heart raced as he approached. The capsule's surface was cold to the touch, but it pulsed faintly as if it were alive. Thomas knelt, brushing sand away, revealing a small viewport. Inside, he saw a figure, a humanoid female, delicate, her body curled as if sleeping. She was stunning, with smooth skin that shimmered faintly under the sunlight and eyes closed in a peaceful expression. Yet there was something fragile about her, something that tugged at Thomas's protective instincts. He ran his fingers along the capsule's controls. A display flickered to life, showing alien text, symbols, and diagrams. Most were incomprehensible, but one part of the display seemed universal, a heart-shaped symbol blinking in green. Thomas did not hesitate. He knew she was alive in some way, waiting for help. The capsule hissed as he carefully pried open the hatch. Inside, the alien's body was warm, but she was unconscious. Her chest rose and fell slowly, aided by a small mechanical device embedded near her collarbone. Thomas carefully lifted her into his arms, marveling at her grace. She was heavier than she looked, yet light enough to feel almost ethereal. "Don't worry," he whispered. "I've got you." Carrying her back to his cabin, Thomas could not stop thinking about her. She was clearly intelligent and yet so vulnerable. Why was she abandoned? Who had sent her? And more importantly, why was he the one to find her? Once inside, he placed her gently on a bed of blankets and activated his medical scanners. The readings were confusing. Her vitals were stable, but her physiology was unlike anything he had ever studied. Her skin responded to touch in subtle ways, shifting color slightly, and her eyes, when they flickered open, reflected a spectrum of colors. She looked at him, not with fear, but with quiet curiosity, as if assessing the stranger who had rescued her. "Can you understand me?" Thomas asked. No response came except for a faint hum from her implants. Then slowly she extended a hand. Her touch was cold at first, then warm, sending a shiver through Thomas's arm. She pointed to a small device embedded in her wrist. When he touched it, images flashed, vistas of alien worlds, strange cities, and towering spires of crystal. The language was incomprehensible, but the emotion was clear: fear, confusion, and hope. Thomas realized she had been through a long journey, perhaps even a crash landing. Someone had left her here intentionally or abandoned her. He did not know, and he did not care. She was here in need of help, and he was the only one who could provide it. Over the next few days, Thomas worked tirelessly to stabilize her. He repaired her life support systems, cleaned her wounds, and monitored her sleep cycles. Each time she awoke, she became slightly more responsive. Her eyes, a dazzling mix of violet and silver, would follow him as he moved around the cabin. She did not speak, but she began to mimic some of his gestures, learning quickly. Thomas named her Liara, after a constellation he used to admire as a boy. At first, the name was meaningless to her, but when he said it repeatedly, she responded with a soft hum, a sign of recognition. The bond between them grew silently. Thomas spoke to her about Earth, about music, about the sunsets that painted the desert in shades of gold and red. Liara, in turn, shared images and emotions through her implant. Thomas could feel her fear, her wonder, her loneliness. And he understood that, in some strange way, she was as alone as he had been all his life. One evening, as the wind howled outside, Thomas noticed her watching him with a faint smile. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it made his heart ache with warmth. He realized that he had not felt this connection with any human before. Liara was not just an alien. She was a companion, a kindred spirit who had survived unimaginable odds. Their peaceful routine was not to last. While Thomas worked on repairs for Liara's implants, the scanners picked up faint signals, distant vehicles approaching. He knew immediately what this meant. Stories of alien discoveries often drew corporate scavengers, mercenaries, and rogue researchers. Liara, fragile though she seemed, was now a target. Thomas's protective instincts flared. "No one will take you from me," he said firmly. "I won't let anyone harm you." Liara's eyes glimmered and she placed a hand on his chest. The gesture, simple and human-like, conveyed trust and understanding. Thomas felt a surge of determination. He would protect her even if it meant fighting the world. That night they prepared for the possibility of an intrusion. Thomas modified the cabin with defensive systems, creating barriers and alerts. Liara, though silent, assisted in her own way, moving with grace and precision as she helped him reinforce the perimeter. For the first time, Thomas did not feel entirely alone. He had a purpose, and she had become central to it. As dawn broke, the desert was painted in warm orange hues. Liara stepped outside for the first time, tentative but curious. She touched the sand, her fingers brushing over the grains, and Thomas watched her with awe. She seemed almost ethereal in the morning light, a creature not of this world, yet somehow perfectly at home in it. Thomas smiled. "We'll face everything together," he said. Liara's eyes shone as if she understood every word. The sun climbed higher, and Thomas realized something profound. He had found more than a rare alien life form. He had found someone who understood him, someone whose presence filled the emptiness he had carried for so long. In that moment, Thomas made a silent vow. He would not let her go. He would protect her, teach her, and share his life with her, no matter the cost. And Liara, though she could not yet speak, seemed to sense the promise. Her gaze met his, steady and unwavering, and a faint smile touched her lips. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Thomas felt a spark of hope, a connection that neither time, distance, nor danger could sever. The canyon where he had found her now felt like a place of destiny. Thomas knew that their story had only just begun. Somewhere in the vast universe, forces might try to separate them, but for now they were together. Two beings from different worlds, united by loneliness, courage, and the quiet miracle of discovery. As the day ended, Thomas watched the stars again, but this time he did not feel empty. Liara stood beside him, her hand brushing against his, and the universe felt just a little smaller, warmer, and more welcoming. For the first time in decades, Thomas Vale felt that he had truly found home. The weeks after Liara's awakening passed quickly, yet slowly enough for Thomas to notice every detail about her. She moved with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly, yet she learned human ways quickly. She watched him carefully, mimicking his movements, and sometimes tilted her head in a way that made Thomas laugh quietly to himself. He had never had someone watch him with such fascination or trust. Thomas had created a small routine. In the mornings, they worked on repairs for Liara's damaged implants. In the afternoons, he tried to teach her simple English words. At first, she could only repeat sounds, soft humming and clicking noises that were not yet language. But over time, she learned enough to understand basic commands. "Sit," Thomas would say, and she would lower herself onto a chair. "Food," she would tilt her head toward the small kitchen he had set up. "Sleep." Her eyelids would flutter as if acknowledging him. It was remarkable how quickly she learned, and Thomas often wondered what kind of mind she had. Her memory seemed perfect. She remembered the patterns of alien images he showed her, and began to respond with gestures that communicated ideas without words. One afternoon, Thomas brought out his old instruments. A small keyboard, a violin, and some stringed instruments covered with dust. He played a simple tune on the keyboard, and Liara watched, her eyes wide with curiosity. She lifted a delicate finger and tapped one key, then another, producing an accidental but charming melody. Thomas laughed and clapped. "You're a natural," he said. Liara's lips curved slightly into what could only be described as a smile. She tilted her head, and the light from the window reflected off her skin in soft colors like a living prism. Over meals, Thomas taught her about human foods, bread, fruits, water, tea. She tasted everything carefully, sometimes making faces at flavors she did not like. Chocolate, however, made her blink rapidly and hum softly, and Thomas laughed again. "I think you like that one," he said. The bond between them deepened quietly. Thomas spoke of the stars, the desert, and the world beyond. He told her stories of humans, of history, and of hope. In turn, Liara shared visions from her implant. He could feel the images of alien cities, glowing forests, and vast oceans on worlds far from Earth. She could not speak their names, but the feelings were clear: awe, loneliness, curiosity. Through these exchanges, Thomas discovered something extraordinary. Liara's mind was not just intelligent, it was creative. She learned quickly and could solve problems with logic and empathy. When a device malfunctioned, she studied it silently, touching wires and buttons until it worked again. She saved him hours of work and even taught him to see small patterns he had missed. But life was not without challenges. Rumors of a living alien had spread faster than Thomas anticipated. He detected distant signals, heavily encrypted, advanced, and intentionally hidden. Corporations, mercenaries, and rogue researchers were already on the move. Someone had noticed the unusual energy readings from Liara's implants and was likely heading for the desert. Thomas prepared. He strengthened the cabin's defenses, adding reinforced walls and automated alerts. He taught Liara to hide quickly and move silently. She learned in days what it had taken him years to master. When a scout drone passed over the canyon one evening, Liara's reaction was instinctive. She signaled to Thomas, who ducked behind a sand dune, while she pressed a small device to emit a light pulse that temporarily blinded the drone's camera. The humans behind it would see nothing but a blank desert. "Good thinking," Thomas said. Liara only tilted her head and hummed, as if acknowledging the praise without words. Despite these dangers, there were quiet, beautiful moments between them. One night, Thomas set up a small telescope. "Look," he said, pointing to a bright cluster of stars. "Those are called the Pleiades. Humans have been looking at them for thousands of years." Liara's eyes reflected the stars. She raised a hand, touching one star as if she could reach it. Thomas felt an odd warmth in his chest. She was trying to understand not just the stars, but the human wonder for them. The days turned into weeks. Slowly, Liara began to grasp human emotion. She watched Thomas when he laughed, when he frowned, when he stared at the desert silently. And sometimes, when no one else was around, she imitated these expressions. Thomas noticed subtle changes in her posture, in the tilt of her head, the softness of her gaze. She was learning not just language, but human empathy. One evening, after a particularly long day of repairs and lessons, Thomas noticed her standing at the cabin window, staring at the moon. "What is it?" he asked. Liara turned toward him, her eyes shining. She extended a hand, touching his shoulder gently. He felt the warmth, the weight of meaning behind the gesture. Then, for the first time, she reached for his hand fully. Their fingers intertwined, and Thomas realized the depth of the connection between them. It was silent, yet full of understanding, trust, and something beyond words. But the peace was fragile. The following morning, Thomas's scanners picked up multiple approaching signals, larger than before and clearly manned by intelligent operators. He recognized the patterns, scavengers who would not stop until they captured the alien. He looked at Liara. She looked back at him calmly, her eyes steady. "We must leave," he said, though he had no exact plan yet. Liara nodded, mimicking his urgency. Together, they packed the essentials: food, water, tools, and a few of Liara's personal items, crystals, small devices, and a strange metal pendant that seemed important to her. They moved silently through the canyon, avoiding the open areas. Thomas could feel his pulse quicken, but Liara remained composed. It was as if she understood the danger instinctively, guiding him with subtle gestures to safe paths. He realized then that she was not just fragile or dependent. She was capable, strong, and brave. As they reached a narrow passage, Thomas paused. "We can't go back," he said. "They'll be watching." Liara looked around, then placed her hand on his chest again. A gentle pulse of energy traveled from her touch to him. It was not dangerous, but comforting. He felt a calm wash over him, as if her presence alone could steady his nerves. "You're incredible," he whispered. "I don't know what I would do without you." Liara blinked, then reached for a small device. It emitted a soft hum, scanning the area ahead. Thomas watched as she studied the terrain, identifying safe paths and potential threats. Her intelligence amazed him every day. Night fell, and they found shelter in a small alcove within the canyon. Thomas built a temporary barrier while Liara rested. He watched her sleep, marveling at her form, so unlike anything he had ever seen, yet somehow perfectly human in emotion. He realized he had not felt this protective over anyone before, not even over another human. She had awakened something in him that he did not know existed, a fierce desire to care, to protect, and to cherish. The following morning, they continued their journey. Thomas taught Liara more about human habits, walking, observing, reading maps, even preparing simple meals on the go. Liara learned with astonishing speed. She began to anticipate his needs, offering small gestures, handing him water, guiding him around obstacles, or using her devices to alert him to potential threats. During one stop, Thomas shared a story from his childhood. He spoke of his father, a scientist who had once told him, "Humanity thrives not just because of intellect, but because we care. We endure, we love, and we protect." Liara listened intently. Later, when Thomas slept, he noticed her touching a small crystal pendant, as if reflecting on his words. Over time, Thomas realized something he had never admitted to himself. He was falling in love with her. Not just because she was extraordinary, but because of the quiet connection they shared, the mutual understanding, the trust, and the companionship. Liara's presence filled the emptiness he had carried for so long. One evening, as the desert sky turned shades of red and purple, they reached the edge of the canyon. The world beyond stretched out vast and open, a landscape of possibility and danger. Thomas looked at Liara. She looked back, her eyes reflecting the sunset. "We will face everything together," he said softly. She reached for his hand again, intertwining fingers. The gesture spoke volumes, trust, understanding, and an unspoken promise. For the first time in his life, Thomas felt truly at peace. They were two beings from different worlds, yet their hearts had found each other. Whatever dangers awaited, whatever trials the universe might send, they would face it as one. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars appeared. Thomas glanced at Liara and whispered, "We've only just begun." Liara's eyes shone with a spectrum of colors, and she nodded gently. In that moment, Thomas understood that their journey was not only about survival. It was about learning, connection, and the quiet power of the human heart to nurture, protect, and love. And somewhere deep within the vast desert, a lonely man and an abandoned alien bride walked together, stepping into a future neither had expected but both were ready to face. The desert was quiet once more, but Thomas knew that calm could not last. Over the past weeks, he and Liara had grown inseparable. Their bond was no longer just teacher and pupil, rescuer and rescued. It had become something deeper. Thomas had come to rely on her as much as she had learned to rely on him. Together, they had survived dangers, learned each other's ways, and forged a connection that went beyond words. Yet the threat that had been shadowing them had not vanished. Advanced scanners continued to hum faintly in the distance. Thomas could detect faint energy pulses, scavengers moving carefully, likely waiting for the right moment to strike. He knew they could not stay in the open desert forever. "We need a safe place," Thomas said as they prepared to move at first light. Liara nodded. She now communicated using small gestures and a few simple words she had learned from Thomas. He led her to a hidden canyon deep within the mountains. It was a place he had discovered long ago while exploring, a natural shelter shielded from view by cliffs and rocky outcrops. It was ideal, not just for hiding, but for building a home. Thomas called it sanctuary in his mind. Once inside the canyon, they began transforming it. Using materials Thomas had brought and items Liara revealed from her capsule, they built a small structure. Walls reinforced with stone and metal, small solar panels for energy, water collected from the canyon springs. It was simple, but it was a home. And in that home, Thomas felt for the first time in decades that he could breathe freely. Liara explored the new shelter with fascination. She touched the walls, ran her fingers along the solar panels, and hummed softly. She was learning, always learning, yet she was also teaching Thomas in subtle ways. She showed him how to use her alien devices to detect movement around the canyon, how to sense energy shifts that humans would normally miss. Her gifts were extraordinary, and Thomas marveled at her intelligence and ingenuity. Despite the safety, the desert's dangers were never far. One evening, Thomas detected unusual energy readings. Vehicles, large, advanced, heavily armed, were approaching. He knew the scavengers had finally tracked them. Heart pounding, he turned to Liara. "They found us," he said. "We need to be ready." Liara did not flinch. Instead, she placed her hand on his chest, and he felt the same pulse of calm energy that had comforted him before. It was a reassurance, a silent promise. Together, they could face anything. The next morning, as the sun rose over the canyon, the attackers arrived. Hovercrafts descended into the canyon, and armored figures moved with precision, scanning for their target. Thomas and Liara hid behind natural rock formations, their small sanctuary shielded from direct view. Thomas whispered instructions to Liara. "We defend the entrance. If they try to breach, use your device to disable their sensors." Liara nodded, stepping forward with quiet confidence. She was no longer a helpless alien. She was a partner, a warrior in her own right. The first scout drone entered the canyon. Liara activated a small pulse from her wrist device. The drone flickered and shut down, tumbling into the sand. The attackers shouted, confusion spreading among them. Thomas seized the moment to set small traps, sand pits, and alarms made from the tools he had brought. The confrontation lasted only minutes, but it tested them. Thomas marveled at Liara's courage and ingenuity. Together, they outsmarted the scavengers, forcing them to retreat, confused and defeated. When the dust settled, Thomas realized what he already knew. Liara was not just his companion. She was his equal in courage, intelligence, and heart. That night, in the quiet of their canyon home, Thomas felt a surge of emotion he could no longer contain. He took Liara's hand and spoke softly. "Liara, I don't want to spend another day without you by my side. Will you stay with me forever?" Liara tilted her head, then gently pressed her forehead to his. Her hand, warm and delicate, rested on his cheek. He felt the pulse of her heart, steady, strong, and full of life, and though she did not speak the words, the answer was clear. Thomas smiled, tears in his eyes. "Then let's make it official, here, now, just the two of us." They held a small ceremony in the canyon under the stars. Thomas read words he had written himself, simple, heartfelt promises of care, protection, and companionship. Liara responded with gestures, intertwining their hands, placing her palm on his heart, and then on her own. The energy that flowed between them seemed to connect their souls. In that moment, the union was complete. They were married, not by law or ceremony known to humans, but by mutual understanding, trust, and love. Afterward, they stood outside their sanctuary, looking at the stars. Thomas whispered, "No matter what comes next, we face it together." Liara's eyes reflected the sky, a spectrum of colors that shifted with emotion. She pressed her hand against his chest again, and he felt the silent promise. The following weeks were peaceful yet productive. Thomas and Liara worked together to strengthen their home. She taught him new techniques from her alien technology, and he shared human knowledge and skills. They planted a small garden in the canyon, combining earth plants with a few hardy alien seeds Liara had recovered. The results were astonishing, plants that glowed faintly at night, flowers that changed colors with the temperature. It was a small paradise, proof that their union could create something extraordinary. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day. Thomas no longer felt the crushing loneliness that had haunted him. Liara was his partner, his friend, his love, and she had come to understand the depth of human compassion, courage, and hope. One day, Thomas suggested an exploration beyond the canyon. "We should see the world," he said. "There's more out there than just the desert." Liara agreed, and together they planned carefully. They would travel lightly, using her alien technology to avoid detection, and continue their research on the strange intersections between human and alien life. During their explorations, they encountered more wonders, ancient alien ruins hidden beneath deserts, strange glowing flora, and even traces of other alien travelers. Each discovery strengthened their bond and their appreciation for each other. Thomas marveled at how Liara understood the universe in ways humans could not, yet she also treasured the simplicity of human experiences, sunsets, laughter, music, and touch. Despite the occasional danger, their love remained steadfast. They learned to read each other's emotions without words, anticipate each other's needs, and support one another through hardships. And through it all, Thomas realized that humanity's greatest strength was not in technology or science alone, but in its capacity for care, courage, and connection. Liara had taught him this in ways no human ever could. Months passed, and the sanctuary grew. It became a place not only of safety but of learning, where human ingenuity and alien knowledge combined. Thomas continued his research, now enriched by Liara's insights. They devised new tools, documented strange plants, and studied energy patterns in the canyon. Together, they created a small world where human and alien understanding coexisted in harmony. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the canyon, Thomas and Liara sat side by side, watching the sky. Thomas spoke softly. "I never imagined life could be like this, full of discovery, wonder, and love." Liara's hand rested on his, her eyes reflecting the twin moons, shimmering with emotion. For Thomas, the journey had been about more than finding a rare alien. It had been about discovering the power of human compassion, resilience, and courage. And for Liara, it had been about learning what it meant to be cared for, to be loved, and to trust. Together, they had survived the desert, faced danger, and built a life that neither could have imagined alone. And in doing so, they became a symbol, not just of survival, but of hope, unity, and the boundless capacity of the human heart. The desert wind whispered past their sanctuary, carrying the promise of more adventures to come. Thomas looked at Liara and smiled. She smiled back, a soft, radiant glow in her eyes. Their journey was far from over. There were challenges ahead, unknown worlds to explore and mysteries to uncover. But Thomas knew one truth: that no danger, no distance, and no obstacle could change. They would face everything together, as partners, as equals, and as lovers united by fate. And in that moment, beneath the twin moons and countless stars, the lonely man and his alien bride stood hand in hand, proving that love, courage, and humanity's indomitable spirit could shine brightly even in the darkest corners of the universe.